Welcome to the Theory of DFS podcast. I'm Jordan Cooper, the co-author of The Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports. It's a 15-hour audio DFS masterclass you can find at theoryofdfs.com. Join with me for a special episode. This guy's making the rounds around the DFS scene. You may have seen him on DraftKings or FanDuel, possibly winning the Millie Maker, possibly being the DraftKings live final winner in 2017 for football, as well as the NBA streets. It's chess is okay. James Gedinger, who is you claim to be retired, but I see that you are playing a little on FanDuel.
I'm retired.
You're retired? I see
I'm
October
retired.
10th results on your Rotogrinders profile.
What? What kind of on my Reddit? Seriously?
Yeah, October 10th, 2021.
Uh-oh.
So are you not retired, or are you retired?
I think I'm playing a little bit on FanDuel currently, but retired. I'm hoping
retired as a profession, as a income generator, more than playing casually.
I'm hoping to have one of those situations where you're retired and you have $1 million year because you announce your retirement. You get that run good, so that's what I'm going to drastically reduce my volume and hope to have great results still. So,
and that's the main reason why. You played predominantly through 2015, 2020 range. Made a lot of money, I guess, and moving on to bigger and better things, as showcased on the recent episode of LOLs. Like, you think the ceiling of playing DFS is limited, but it's all in relation to what your goals are as a person making money. I know you come from a poker background. I'm more of the Joey Knish type of, like, I got the van if you ever need a job, right? But like if I can make $50,000 to $75,000 a year with limited risk of ruin. Like, I live in Louisville and I'm 42 years old. I'm perfectly fine with that. If this is what I do for a living and don't have to go to get a real job, I'm fine with it. But you're more into like some more investing and higher ceiling activities than I am. So that's the main reason why that you've now put up your coaching service on Metafy.gg for $500 an hour. That, for some people may think $500 an hour is expensive, and some people may think it's extremely cheap.
Yeah, I think it's very cheap for what one can get out of that. But I don't think there's anything wrong with your approach. I mean, it's just a matter of how much of it is, like, if DFS is a good thing in your life. Because if you're making 50 to 100K a year, let's say, it's a question of, like, at what cost that comes, whether or not, like, what kind of time commitment that requires, and if it's something you love to do, or if it's something you're waking up on Sunday and dreading it.
Did you end up getting to the point where you woke up on Sunday and dreaded it?
No, I did in poker, especially because I played GPPs I guess you call them MTTs in poker, but
right. Right. You don't play GPPs in poker.
Sundays, MTT Sundays were very grueling, and I was very much ready to call it in poker when DFS came along. So,
but you were late. You were pretty late to poker in comparison to me. Like, I'm old. I don't. It's kind of weird to say that I'm old school poker. I'm early 2000s boom poker. I'm 2+2. World Series of Poker, moneymaker effect type of era of poker, where you sign up for party poker and it's a slot. I mean, it's a cash machine. If you just play monkey poker, it's straightforward, value bet, everything like that. But I mostly played live. So to me,
wow.
No, I played live in the underground games in New York City.
So cool.
So it's a little bit more. A little bit more interesting, less solitaire lifestyle, and more interesting characters. Obviously, the games are slower, but you're playing against a lot of the same clientele, you're playing in private games and stuff, and yes, you don't get as many hands, but when you played with someone for 8 months and they still make the same mistakes over and over again, it's to me, it's like I said, I'm more of a blue collar approach. Like, dude, show up, play for 10 to 12 hours, watch the sports games, hang out with, it's Brooklyn, it's Italian guys, it's Irish guys. You get some businessmen, some college students, and to me, I found that fun. But you're right, it gets to the point where, after I did that for like 4 or 5 years, while I was still doing stand up comedy, and wasn't
Yeah.
focusing on my stand up, and I'm just like, what's the long term like happiness
Hmm.
like what am I producing for the world? And I saw that's like I'd rather just let me do stand up, and then of course DFS came around, and I just get sucked right back into the non-productive for the world type of activities. Is that more similar to like I don't consider that burnout, but more of a like you reprioritize your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I could go on at DFS at the pace I was going, to be honest, as well. Like, I wasn't dreading it. I really enjoyed playing DFS, but it's just too much. Um, it's too much of an effort,
Well,
I
what was the
guess.
biggest parts of your process that were too much? Because I know on Lowell's you talked about 80 hours a week,
Hmm.
and I don't know about maybe you're doing something differently than me. Like I'm the complete opposite mentality of like I don't need to be the best. I just need to be better than most of the field. So like I don't need to be precise. Like my goal is
Yeah.
never to be precise. It's to be as more directionally accurate than the field. So like my process, like dude, like most of my day involves either doing shows or watching TV. I mean, I'm just on the bullshitting on Twitter or something because I'm not making my own projections, but
Yeah.
I'm devising my own strategies. But for the most part, especially in NBA, uh, most of the time until 6:30, like who the fuck knows what's going? I mean, what? No one knows what's going on until late anyway. So I feel no need to spend the time while you could be more precise spending more time. I found at least that the edge that you gain from the extra time just it was diminishing returns. That I'm much better off like an hour before the slate going, okay, what's going on? Who's injured? Who's what? Whatever. What's my late swap possibilities? Let me run some lineups, run this, run that, and boom, bing,
Yeah.
bang, throw in my lineups, and then obviously sit around the computer all night, late swapping because who knows if Kawhi's gonna play? That type of stuff. So I can understand being burnt out a little on the late swap stuff for NBA, but you had a bottom up approach where you originated like everything that you were doing.
Yeah, that's right. Um, yeah, I was definitely not a boom, bing, bang kind of guy in DFS. I mean, uh, I really sought to understand all of the situations as well as I could, and that just took time. And I am a little bit of a perfectionist, and so like, I mean, I probably could have been a little more efficient, but overall, I think it's tough. I think that what you're talking about, I mean, you can succeed in the low stakes, and you can succeed in kind of the order of magnitude you're talking about. I think it's going to get harder and harder. Um, but I think overall that if you're to get like great results in DFS, you really need to have like a full time professional attitude. And that's going to need to have like a systematized way you're studying and a systematized way that you're like doing the same thing every day to ensure that you're making the best rosters you can. Um,
Well, I mean, I have
and
those systems. It doesn't take that long. I mean, to me, it just I mean, one of the things that how I got better in DFS is primarily through studying other players. So
yeah.
like chess is okay. I mean, I mean, I downloaded the CSVs. This is even before stuff like Results DB or Lineup Rewind. So I would just download the CSVs. I played soccer primarily in the first like 2 years of my DFS career.
Hmm.
So it's obviously a much smaller community. Learned how to play that, and then it branched out to other sports. But still, getting into MLB, getting into NBA, NFL, just like let me go to the Roto Grinders rankings. Who's doing well? let me download their lineups and put it into Excel and and what types of lineups. Let me take a look at the projections versus the ownership versus. It's like, oh, okay. I mean, that's where you learn the basic stuff in the very beginning of like, oh, that's why you play five batters from the same team. Oh, that's why you play three guys from the same power play line.
Yeah.
Like those, like the very basic type of, correlation. Oh, you play a quarterback and the two wide receivers. Oh, I mean that.
Well, I came up with these, so I had no one to study.
Well, yeah, back and
Um,
back when you started, a lot of the stuff that's available now, and even I'm not even talking about like content sites like Roto Grinders, Awesemo,
mhm.
ETR, Daily Roto, things like that. But just the access, even like, hey, it's 2021, you still can't download the CSVs on FanDuel. I mean,
Yeah.
but just the ability to, uh, just when the contest starts, download stuff from DraftKings, run it through whatever process you run it through. I mean, a lot of times now I could run through stuff and like halfway through the slate go like, who has the best EV,
Yeah.
in who's currently, like, I may be out of it, but I'm just like, I'm interested, and especially in MMA slates where it's very binary. I know you don't play
Hmm.
MMA, but since it's one fight to the next fight to the next fight, it's very easy to see after each fight, like, what are the EV of all these lineups in the contest now based on the projections that I have, or the
Yeah.
odd betting lines and stuff like that. But that access, when I started playing in 2015, like really wasn't there. I mean, like you had to figure it out on your own, and even if you
Hmm.
did download or scrape data, like there was no one talking about, like there were no podcasts, there were no, like, no, people were still at the level of like, what's a good play, right,
Hmm.
type of level that you had to, I mean, if you had to go look at NBA and go, what are they doing that I'm not? While more now, like especially like on this podcast, like I discuss all the I mean, like it's a lot of the stuff that you were doing probably in 2017 into 2021 is almost amongst the profitable players is common
Common.
knowledge.
Yeah. Well, I think that's right. I remember in like 2016, 2017, a lot of the content was focused around like who's a lock. Was like I just remember like I would listen to podcasts and keep track of like how many who were the locks basically. And I think you hear that probably less and less. I think you know better than I. Um, but that was like I don't know. You would just have like people played like I don't know. I think people were like very consensus seeking back then. And, like basically, cash lineups were very heavily owned, particularly at the high stakes, and um, things you just don't really see. Like ownership in NFL really is evened out at quarterback and wide receiver and defense. And back in the day, could be like very polarized. Um, it, I remember like the sorts of tweets that were like, if you don't play this defense in every lineup, you're a fish.
Right, when
And
defense is so
that kind of
variant that
thought
you should never
process.
do that. Right.
Um,
No, now it's the opposite. James, now it's the opposite. Now it's more of the, oh, the Washington football team is going to be the cheap defense. It's like you're a fish if you play them at 22% ownership in any lineup, because
yeah,
why would play the Texans for 100 cheaper that at 2% ownership, because defense is so, like, dude, the projections are within 1 point of each other. So like,
as the
but back then
field,
it wasn't like that.
well, I think the field went from like almost exclusively hand built to pretty heavily optimized. And so, like, that had its effects on ownership. And the kind of thing you're talking about is like, it's also predictable, but it's just a matter of like people are using, like, the average player is now more likely to be using tools, more likely to be optimizing. So I think just being like aware of how that affects things, because yeah, back in the day, like people would just literally like lock in by hand, and you think about ownership in terms of like who's the first person people are locking into their roster tonight, um, And now it's a little bit more of like who's popping on Daily Roto or whatever, or the sources you talked about. It's like, I think the field's changed. I mean, it's not good. I mean, it makes the game harder, but it's also just beatable. It's like you just have to adjust a little bit.
Right, but even back then, like the good plays, like for instance in NBA in 2017, anyone that was talked about as a lock for the most part, if you did your own projections, they would be the better projected plays. Now, would they be worth playing in 100% of your lineups? Probably not. But I think the field. I mean, if we go back to 2012, which I didn't play in, I mean that was the Wild West of, like, didn't even have like minutes projections, or I mean it's just like that people were playing players that were injured type of stuff. But in 2015, 2016, like this, so and so is out. And obviously, the guy that normally would see 23 minutes at point guard is now going to get 38 minutes at point guard, and he's 3,800. Like,
and he's 20% owned back then.
Right? No, well, back in 2012, he's 20% owned, but back in 2015, 2016, he'd still be 60% owned, which is still probably under owned. But it's not like the content. It's not like it's. You have to figure that even back then, in 2016, 2017, that the good plays, like the field for the most part was able to identify like inefficiently salary priced players that were egregiously someone that's 4,800 that on this slate should be 7,000. They may not be 89% owned. Maybe they'll be 72% owned. I mean, maybe not as high owned as they should be, but it's not like the type of thing where this guy's the best play and it's like, dude, like he's like nothing special. Why is this guy 40% owned for no reason? It's like, well, they're 1,000 under like I think the average sharper player, it's kind of weird. Like the more regular player, even back then, we're able to see like the screaming values. But it's like after those screaming values, it was like ownership could go like there's it's a home game narrative, it's a birthday thing, it's something that has nothing to do. They have a great matchup with the defender. He's getting Jimmy Butler defense, like those type of like bullshit things that would never show in an accurate projection model. So that's more of what you're talking about. But like the screaming value plays were the screaming value plays regardless. Even from the content that you were listening to.
Yeah, I forget what year did they added CSV upload to the sites, because I think that made a big difference. Because I remember like when I was doing things by hand and before we had CSV upload, like the kind of guy you were talking about would be very low owned still. And I remember, I don't remember the years exactly, but I still remember in 2016, 2017 having like pretty drastically different opinions from the field. Even 2018, 2019, 2020, it felt more and more like NBA projections would be pretty bad to start the day. And by the time lock came around and people had enough time to think about it, a lot of the times the sites would start coming to a lot of the same conclusions I did, which was not a good feeling.
That's the reason why you retire, but don't you figure that out of all the sports, NBA is the most likely one to be efficient like that because it's not event based?
What do you mean?
Like, I mean, how off could no matter what methodology you use for projections, like even I know the simplistic way is the fantasy points per minute, which is not the right way to do it. And just like
Per
based on the
possession.
players on the court, based on historical data, in this configuration, like he's going to be playing 18 minutes with these guys on the court. He's 1.12 fantasy points per minute. Like you're not computing assist rate, or you're not like breaking it out. You're just doing it purely FPPM. Like that's not the right way to do it, but directionally accurate. As long as you get the minutes, like you didn't see people like, oh, this guy's going to play 34 minutes, and you're like, no, he's playing 23. Like. At that point, like the difference between 2 minutes here and there may drastically alter whether or not you have 8% of a guy or 32% of a guy. So I can understand in that range, but I couldn't see, unless you tell me otherwise, where, even around the industry, everyone has them somewhere between 25 and 27 minutes, and you have them at 32 minutes. Like, was that
Oh,
happening?
no, that happens quite a bit, actually.
Really? It does?
Yeah. I think that NBA is a spot where you have a really high opportunity to have a projection advantage, which is not true in other sports, like in MLB and well, I don't play MLB much, so I won't talk about MLB. But in NFL, I think it's a little harder.
But that's primarily due to the variance of the sport. It has nothing to do with just in basket. In football, you could get a lucky touch. Someone could score 15 points on one passing play, and
Yeah.
it's just the range. I understand the medians because it's a wider range of outcomes. In basketball, the range of outcomes is it's very rare for a 30% usage player to play 38 minutes and score 12 points. It's just not going to happen like that.
I think in NFL there are times when you could have a pretty different opinion on the field in terms of pass attempts or rush attempts or receptions, and that can move the needle a great deal. But I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not really reasonable, in my opinion, to have it's not a great edge if your edge is I'm at 0.3 touchdowns on this guy, but the field's at 0.25. I don't know if that's so reasonable.
But how does that translate to basketball? What's the difference between having a 27-minute projection and a 29-minute projection? The players that are more likely to have the wider minutes projections would be the bench players, the centers, those types. How do you get LeBron's minutes wrong? How are you off by 10 minutes on him? Of the star players.
It's easy. I think it's done. I think that I think for NBA you can have a drastically different opinion from the field that's material and accurate. And in NFL, the difference between 5 and 5.5 receptions is just never as clear, if that makes sense. I think some of it has to do with the fact that you're dealing with smaller numbers where I guess whether a player gets 4 or 5 targets is
the difference in one target doesn't make it as much of a difference as a difference in 10 minutes on the court.
Yeah.
But when would be the situations where you have a 10-minute different minute project? That's what I'm trying to understand of you're going in. Is it the type of thing where everyone's going in thinking they're playing big? I'm using very general examples of they're going in, you see the starting lineup, and you go, well, this is what the rotation's going to be. And then your attitude is no, they're going to be playing small for most of this game. So they're going to be playing 3-guard formation. So this guy that you have projected for 21 minutes is really going to be playing 29. And the power forward that you think is going to play 29 minutes is actually going to be playing 21. All right? I'm just trying to find the pragmatic give me a real world example of how you could be 8 to 10 minutes off versus the field.
So
there's not you don't have to give a specific for a team, just how I gave the example. We've seen plenty of times with the Raptors. It's Chris Boucher season and everyone thinks he's playing 25 minutes and he ends up playing 8 minutes.
yeah.
But the thing is that I act as if I don't know. So my game theory method of playing is I'm going to consider that probability, know it's high variance, has a wide range of outcomes, and if the field goes too much in one direction, I just play the other direction. I don't have to gauge whether or not it's going to be right. But if he's going to be 32% owned on a 12-game slate because he's 4,800 and everyone thinks he's going to play 30 minutes, and I know that there's a possibility he just plays 12, I'm not going to have much of him. But if he's only going to be 3% owned because everyone thinks he's going to play 12 and maybe he plays 30, I'm going to play more of him. But in that example, I don't need to project that. I just need to be aware that this is a player that has his standard deviation is really high, and I'm just going to be
Hmm.
anti-market.
Yeah.
You're trying to actually predict. You're putting in the minutes yourself. I'm not doing that. So I'm giving you. I gave another example, that Chris Boucher example. So like I'm trying to get out of you, what would be an example like that? Would that be accurate? Would an example like I gave be one where you could be 10 minutes off projecting certain players compared to the field?
Yeah, I think what you're describing is something that more often comes up in NFL. I think that's like like a frequent thought process in NFL. Um, I think that what you're saying is fair. Depending on the coach, who the coach is, and how the coach behave, and the coaching psychology, I think you have more of a read on what happens on average in NBA than you do in other sports. Um,
But would it be that example of like, oh, this coach is more likely to do X, which means this player is going to play more than this other player, even though the field doesn't realize that?
if there's a situation where everyone thinks it's Boucher because it just happens to have been him the last couple of nights, but in reality, there are 3 or 4 players who could play that role or play that position, then yes, I would have a projection that's like 10 points lower than the field potentially.
Okay, so it's those
Um,
types of example. I mean, I'm just you don't have to give me a
that
specific. I'm not trying. I'm just not pulling
that's
teeth.
one. I
You
mean,
could give an
there
example from
are.
5 years ago with you could give
I
an
think
example
in
Dominic Wilkins on the Hawks from 1988. Like you don't have to give away something that you know about a specific team currently. I'm just saying that type of thing where you
well,
could look at
Chipotle
at
Addict did
projections
this
around the
well.
industry and be vastly off on the minutes at least.
Chipotle Addict, and I think it was the 2015 or 2016 NBA Live Final. I think Anthony Davis was announced out, and everyone played Dante Cunningham, I think, and he played Solomon Hill, and that's kind of like a situation you're talking about. And
Right.
Solomon Hill went for like 40 or something, but just because like the last couple of times that Anthony Davis was out, Dante Cunningham got the minutes. But honestly, it's not that clear who it's going to be on a night to night basis. So
Right.
like if you're projecting that, well, maybe you go like 60, maybe you're thinking it's like 60-40, one guy or the other. That distribution is, it's like you're talking about distributions that are a little abnormal for NBA for these players. They're going to have like bimodal distributions or
Mm.
pretty heavily negatively correlated, or it depends on the situation. But
But yeah, but it's very similar. I mean, we see this in NBA. I mean, what ends up happening? Like you're giving the exact examples I'm talking about. Of you see it sometimes at 4:30, some guy gets ruled out, and it's like, oh, like this guy's, especially like at the point guard position or something, and it's like,
mhm,
oh, Jeff Teague. I'm just making up a name. It could be anyone. Is going to step in and oh, we're expecting Teague to start, and we're going to project him to start and close and play 34 minutes. And then what ends up happening is that it's 6:45 and the starting lineups are announced and Teague isn't in the starting lineup. It's someone
yeah,
else. Like a lot of
and
people
some
overreact and go, well, it's not necessarily like sometimes the guy that comes in off the bench is the one that closes. So like we get a lot of this overreaction of like, is it if this guy's not starting, uh, then he's not going to play X amount of minutes. It's like no, he actually could play 28 minutes off the bench, and in fact, because he's playing more of his minutes without some of the star players, he's going to have higher usage. So like, but you have to gauge. Hey, sometimes the guy doesn't start and he literally only plays 8 minutes. I mean, sometimes the overreaction is correct, but like I said, how I treat that, unlike I think in sports betting, you'd be considered an originator and I'd be considered a steam chaser. Like
okay,
I don't need to make the you're trying to make the line, and me I'm just trying to leverage the market. So like as long as I
hmm
know that those situations exist, which means you need to know something about NBA. I can't just look at numbers and go, well, they're going to project him for 28 minutes. I'm going to act like it. I'm going to go, no, well, this could be Peyton Pritchard time. They have Peyton Pritchard at 12 minutes and Jeff Teague at 28. It could be the other way. And based on if I see Teague is 36% owned and Pritchard's 4% owned, like I'm much more likely to say maybe I'm going to make more money when the field is incorrect than when the field is. But if they're like what's that efficient line? If it ends up being Teague is 26% and Pritchard's 16, then it's like, well, it doesn't really matter which one I like. Like now they're at like efficient levels. So like how I view DFS is more through that lens. And you deal you it almost seems like you play more where what the field is going to do is less important to you, and you just want to be you want to be precise.
No, I wouldn't. I would not say that.
Why wouldn't you say that?
I think that all of these things are factors that play into how you play. And I think that the best spots, particularly in NBA, are not only when the field's taking a certain line, but you have a material reason to believe that it's incorrect. I think there are a lot of spots in NBA where a guy is very heavily owned and it's just going to play out that way like a large percentage of the time, or there's not a lot to be gained by fading them, if that makes sense.
But yeah, it's those $3,800 guys that should be 72. I mean, it's one of those. The guy has a 10x median on his salary.
Yeah,
and he's just like it would. A lot of people, I'll play a different $3,800 guy. Like, no, if you're gonna fade him, that means you just don't play a lineup that has a $3,800 player in it, and you just hope.
Yeah, and there are times when the field will arbitrarily, and I'm sure this still happens, and it happens a lot, where the field will kind of arbitrarily gravitate to one guy who's 3,800, he's the one who's in all of the top 150 on Daily Roto or on any of the sites that you talked about. But in reality, there are like 7, 8, or 9 guys who could beat him. And I think that does come up in NBA. But in the times where like Mike Conley's out and Mario Chalmers is stepping into his role, and like Mario Chalmers is min salary and he's likely to play 30 minutes in like a conservative case. I mean, those spots.
You just jam them in. You just jam. It's kind of those are jam it in spots.
I mean, it's asymptotic as he approaches 100% ownership, but I mean, it's in the low stakes you'd never consider fading him. I think in a live final where he might be in like 95%, it could make some sense, or some kind of situation, some kind of like extreme situations. It's fun the way people play live finals too, because I think the live finals have gotten tougher, like a lot tougher, especially when they made so many of the entries 5K. But they really used to be a gold mine. And a lot of people were very timid to move away from the chalk and to move away from the best plays. So you get really extreme spots, even in NFL.
But you see that in high stakes currently. I mean, on the Monday show that I do on Roto Grinders, as well as on this podcast. I mean, Eric, who the normal co-host, like he plays primarily, 4-figure plus type of contest, Game Changer, 1,500, the luxury box. I'm more in that spy, power sweep level, as well as 150ing the slant, right? Like $9 slant type of level for NFL. And
why
for
would
NBA,
you play the slant?
What?
Why would you play the slant?
The slant is the best payout structure.
What do you mean by that?
From first to, I mean, like the slant this year is 30,000 a first, 20,000 a second, 10,000, 8,000.
I'm glad you brought this up. The best payout structure is the one where the most money is up top.
From an EV perspective, you're absolutely right. But from if I don't have $50 million bankroll perspective and I want to make $50,000 to $75,000 a year, I'd rather get paid off on my 1% finishes. So I absolutely 100% agree with you, because I know from an because the field is more likely to not play contrarian enough to get the equity in first place. And when I do play GPPs, I mean, I specialize in large field GPPs, and my lineups tend to be fucking contrarian as hell. But I also don't. I mean, like when the Millie Maker, I don't play because, like, yes, will I live enough lifetimes to realize the EV to make it worth playing the amount of volume that I would need in order to do that? So to me, it's a utility theory type.
Not with that attitude. The answer is not with that attitude.
Well, that's my attitude. I'm Joey Knish.
I-
That's what I do.
I think that I think maybe you should just play the Millie Maker.
Why?
Well, I mean, do what you think is best for you and your situation, but I think that you're going to make the most in the long run on an annual basis if you play top heavier structures. I know it's counterintuitive.
No, it's I
I think
understand
that,
exactly what you, James. I know exactly what you're saying. I am sacrificing EV for reducing my variance, right?
but you realize that this is causing you to take a line that's common with regulars and common with common with like fish or weak players aren't thinking the way you're thinking. They're like, oh, I want to win the lottery. And like bad regs are thinking what you're thinking. So you end up playing like a stronger field. And like the slant is just going to be a much lower ROI.
But a ROI that I could realize more than the Millie Maker.
I'm not so certain.
Well, that's what I.
I think we disagree on this.
Right.
Um,
I mean, I also play
I think,
a ton of cash games. I mean, I play a ton of. Truthfully, I play. I know we're not going to talk about it. Showdown contests. I think single game contests have the biggest edge in all of DFS. And you don't want to give away anything for that, which is fine. That's perfectly fine. I mean, I'm pretty sure I know exactly what it is. So I mean, it's like I don't mind talking about it, but apparently you don't.
I think that if I were in your position and I wanted to maximize what I make or I want to realize my returns, as you put it, I would try to play as many slates as I could, rather than changing the way I played a particular slate. Like, I think it's really hard to beat DFS, honestly. I think it's really hard to have an advantage. And I think you need to play in a way to maximize your EV. Otherwise, I think it's just too hard to make those kind of strategic sacrifices in order to try to, like, I think that if you're going to end up just, it's just going to be, I think, a very expensive way to lower variance is, I guess, where I come down on that.
So it'd be worthwhile to have bigger swings. Like it still comes down to that. Like my attitude is that can I make $75,000 a year with the least amount of risk possible? So like that, and to me, that's the equation that I'm solving. It may not be to make the most amount of money, which is what you're trying to solve, but at least you could understand from my perspective that if your goal was to make X and make it with as almost zero risk to make X, how would you pursue playing DFS? Like I
wouldn't play anything more than like a $5 buy-in, and I would play every slate.
Right, but now
as many entries as I could at the lowest stakes on every site I could. And
you're describing what I did. I mean, I may not go to the extent of playing every slate, but I mean, like that's why when Eric's like, I play the 15, like I see how you could exploit the higher stakes because they play too chalky, too duped, the ownership condenses too much, but it's still, I mean, you're still also playing against highly projected line. I mean, the variance in those contests is still going to be high, but it's still the biggest. I mean, you don't listen to the show, but the overall theme of this show is like kind of like the Jekyll and Hyde, the devil and the angel on the shoulder type of thing, where Eric is like, these small field quote sharper contests. Like, dude, half the field is playing cash lineups, and I could just do this, and my EV goes up through the roof. And I look at it, and I say to him, it's like, dude, I play these low-stakes, large field stuff. I download the CSV, and I find 20% of the lineups almost have no chance of winning first place, and the rake is 15%. So it's like, I can't, it's harder to win 50,000, 100,000 person field contests. I mean, I have, but to me, the risk versus, I'm getting enough, if the payout structure is flatter, I'm getting more money back when I don't win first, and I'm still getting 20% of the field playing pretty much dead lineups, and then another 20% of the field playing like median lineups that like I have such an EV edge over. Like, why aren't I playing as many of those as possible? But keeping the playout structures, not playing the Millie Maker, so I don't have to like it's first or nothing. So at least if I put in $1,500 worth of entries, like on a bad day, I still get back like $1,000. I mean, like I'm only risking 500 of it. I know you're smiling, but like to make more that wouldn't be the way to
Jordan,
make more money. It would be the way to reduce your risk of ruin.
uh, Jordan, I think you're difficult to coach. Um, but I think that I see some major flaws in both you and Eric's thought process here.
So
And
what are the
I
flaws?
think,
Tell it. Go. What's the flaws?
well, I'll start with Eric. Well, I've already told you what the flaws in your thought process are. And when it comes to Eric, in fact, you have a lower ROI as you move up in stakes. So
Obviously.
in spite of what Eric believes he's seeing, or the mistakes that he thinks these rigs are making, they are, as you've pointed out, much smaller in magnitude than the average player in the $3. And so, for your players who are listening, and for your listeners who are in your shoes, and shoes that I was when I started playing DFS, like want to make a living, want to make 50 to 100K a year, I would recommend playing every slate every day on FanDuel and DraftKings, and betting like $1,000 per slate, which is just like maxing the $3 basically on both sites. And that's, I think, the best way to realize your edge in the long run, is giving yourself as many shots as possible.
Right, because the main thing that I mean with Eric's approach, I mean we even had a conversation this past week that I thought he played a lineup that was just so under projected for what he was gaining from it, that like you're giving up too much. Yeah, you're right. A lot of these people are playing cash type lineups, but like if you're going to play a lineup that's 15 points projected lower than it, I mean like dude, you're not really exploiting it. You have to play a lineup that is 5 points. I mean, like something within reason.
If Eric actually believed what he was saying, he'd be maxing the high stakes, and he'd be like very rich because he'd have like a 20% ROI or more in the high stakes. It's just
right,
not
but
true.
You still have to realize it.
It doesn't play out. It's not even that you have to realize it. Like, if you're good at the high stakes and you're winning at 20% and the $500, like, you're going to be very rich playing DFS. That's just
But I don't think that. But you would agree. I don't think that's achievable though. 20%.
I think it is achievable. I think you have to be the best.
Oh, obviously you have to be the best. Obviously, but I mean, what would be a reason if you were an average? Like, I don't want to say an average player, but I mean the same thing happens.
The average player loses.
Well, obviously, I'm talking about an average profitable. Like, what would be a reasonable? Like, people ask me about cash games, and I say like at the low, like even now in 2021, if you're the best cash player, you could beat the low stakes, and I'm talking about $1 to $3 stakes at 15 to 18% in most sports. Now, it may be gotten a little bit hard. I can't play those contests anymore, so I'm not sure. But I play on FanDuel where I'm not limited yet, and I could tell you that like even at the lowest stakes cash for NBA and NFL, it's extremely soft. So like even if you're not as good as I am, maybe you could get a 7% edge. But I'm telling you, once you move up to $5 and above, where no one's restricted, like your ROI just go. I mean, like it is a drastic. You know, if you could get a 3 or 4% return, like that's good. The best maybe is 7 or 8, but like
in cash
games,
stakes?
double ups, head to heads.
Yeah, I don't really know. If I've considered playing cash, it's only been basically high stakes. So I can't really comment on that.
Right.
I would say too, because I forgot about that if you have the ability to play the like quarter arcade and stuff like that, I would max out on all of those earnings before you moved up, basically. And in the year I played the quarter arcade, I think before they started doing that, I'm pretty sure I was up like something absurd. It was like 50 entries. I played it on every slate, and I might have been up like 30 to 50K. So like in the quarter. So I mean, like that's if you could play that, that's like that's an amazing opportunity to kind of achieve the things you're talking about.
Right, but people don't believe that. I tell them the very same thing. You want to seek the weakest opponents possible. I mean, that the number one thing that I say in the course, the one thing that is the most likely to mean something in your profit is the strength relative strength between you and your opponents. There's no
Yeah.
no there's nothing you could do with projections. There's nothing to do with simulations. Said you could be the
It
10th.
doesn't matter what's up top, or like it doesn't if you're in the quarter arcade and it's like $500 up top. I mean, that's probably your best spot on the night.
Right, but you could build it up from there. I mean,
Mhm.
that's what I.
That's
mean,
where you start. That's where
right.
I
That's where
started.
you
I didn't
start.
start in the high stakes.
Right.
Do you know how long
some
it
people
took me
some
until
people
I
come
entered
to
a
me.
$20?
Right. Well, some people, James, come to me and go, "I've been playing the quarter arcade for 6 months, and I've been doing well." Right, and they're showing a profit and something like that. It's like. But if I were playing in the $3 play action or the $9 slant type of level or the $18 bat flip or whatever, I'd be making so much more money. And I'll go. If you're good enough, yes, when you step up, you'll be able to beat those games also. But
Mhm.
there are plenty of people that say I've been playing the quarter arcade for a year and I've never won it. Is it worth even playing? Should I just play like, dude? If you can't beat the quarter arcade, you think you're going to beat the play action? You think you're going to beat like you're playing against
Yeah, you're
the
not.
worst line? Like, and there may be good players down there working their way up. So I'm not saying
Yeah.
that everyone that plays the quarter arcade is a fish or something, but that's where if you can't beat
If
those
it's player
fields,
excluded, if you're strong, if it's player excluded, I would expect that you can get like 70% plus ROIs in those games.
that high, I don't. In
Yeah.
GPP, 70% long run. I mean, maybe in a course of a year.
Mhm. Like
Not now, James. I don't think now.
in the quarter arcade, if it's excluding players,
Yeah.
I think at the low stakes you could probably get like 40 to 50%.
Okay. Well, that I would agree with you on that. Like I think
Yeah.
35 to 40 in the low stakes. I think that's. I mean, that's when I was playing in the lower stakes. That was around my ROI, and of course it comes through big wins, right? Is that one thing when you coach people? I find that one of the harder things to get across to people. I mean, it's in the course of like it's similar to poker, right? It's like one long game of poker. It's not like oh I haven't cashed in 2 weeks. I go
One thing that I've
do I care
noticed
about
actually,
cashing, right? Like
one thing I've noticed actually in coaching players is people are pretty eager to take out their big wins when they're talking about their results. And that's something that like I'm not sure that you can do. So
well, you're playing for them. Why would you take them out?
yeah, I know. So people are just like, I'm 5%. I won big once, and without it, I'm like 5%. It's like,
That's
yeah, I
great.
know it's high variance, but yeah,
That's what you're playing for.
Yes, if you break even between big wins, then you're going to be a huge winner in DFS,
Right.
and that's the goal to a certain extent.
Well, that's the reason why I play cash games. I mean, to me,
Mhm.
I view that as a way to basically keep my downswings less swingy, right? To flatten them out. Because I still play more. I mean, in comparison to my GPP volume, I mean, I still play. If I wanted to make it, it should be 95-5 or something type of mix. But I mean, the main goal of cash games is like, dude, at the high stakes, the differences between players I'm not going to play for a 2% edge at $50,000 a slate volume. The variance there is so dramatic that I'm not going to play 1v1s versus, the guys up there. Even if I am have an advantage, it just makes no sense. Right? I mean, it still comes down to when you coach your players, that you're coaching, that are they more likely, because like you said, the fact that they're asking you if you take out your big wins, they don't look to be a profitable player. Like, truthfully, that's how I'm more likely to consider that person to be like thinking sharply than someone, because then I've been playing for 6 years and I luck box, won, and now you're more likely, James, to find people that have the attitude of, and we've seen it, and someone that has won the Millie Maker once doesn't necessarily make them a good player, right?
As
I mean,
have.
well, I'm talking. You've
once.
done more than you've done. I'm not. The
One
point
time
is, I'm not
Kenyon
talking
Drake got
about
a
you.
fourth
I'm just talking
touchdown
about
to cost me.
right. It's not hard for someone out of a group of a million people to win the Millie Maker with some negative EV lineup. So like
that happens all the time.
Right. But the reason why your students are asking you, well, if I take out my big wins, like I'm not a good player, like because they don't want because it's the number one thing. Don't you think that the hardest thing in DFS is to figure out whether or not you're playing well or running good?
Yes, I think that's very difficult. And
How
I
do
think
you
that
how
it
do
just
you how do you judge it?
well, I use my own software and I run simulations, but when I go on downswings, I mean, self doubt still totally comes into it. Like, I don't know. I always took downswings very tough. I've gone on several like $1 million downswings in DFS, and
See, this
it,
this is the reason why I don't play. I play the slant and I don't play the millie. This is now. See, this is the type of things where,
I would have gone on more if I'd played the slant.
Really, why?
Well, it's just I think in terms of game selection, like the slant's one of the worst games you can add.
Well, because you think
even
the opponent's strength is too high in comparison.
for the stakes, yeah. I mean, I think if you look at ownership and stuff like that, it probably plays more like the $100 or something. I mean, I'm not looking at it week to week.
The slant plays closer to the Wildcat than it does to the millie.
Well, that's the information. That's really what I'm trying to say.
Right. No, I agree with that. I agree with you.
But you're going to lower your variance in the long run the most by having the highest ROI. That's why I disagree with playing cash to lower variance and some of the other things you're talking about. I think that just having the highest ROI in the long run is going to cause you to have the lowest floor, which is kind of like the question of should you change your standard dev or should you change your average case? And I'm saying that like you should change your average case because it's tough to beat DFS.
I don't necessarily. I think in practicality, if you not considering sealing, if you're considering sealing, I agree with you. But I'm not considering sealing. I'm solving for getting back to it for the mathematical example. My end goal is a finite number that is achievable through less variant methods. If let's say James, my number was I want to make $500,000 a year, then I would agree with you because like I don't think you could make $500,000 a year without maximizing your first place equity in large top heavy. I understand that, but for 50 to 75,000, like dude, like I could win one large field GPP a year and lose every other slate, and I'd be successful. And I would reach that X goal. You may disagree that X goal is too low, but that's
it's not a matter of it being too low. I just think that you take the same thing you're doing and change your game selection and you make more on average.
On average, but I mean my standard deviation is going to be much higher.
Yeah, well, maybe we disagree on that.
Okay. Oh, okay. Maybe there's I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Maybe I'm overvaluing it. Maybe I could be right, but not to the extent. Like, if I would just change my game selection a little, my variance wouldn't be as dramatically higher. And maybe I'm too scared to do that.
Well, let me ask you this. Are you playing the 4 o'clock slate? Are you playing the 1 o'clock slate? Are you playing the...
I play the showdown slate. I play the large... Hey, I play the millie for the showdown, and I have no problem putting in $2,000 and getting back like $200. So... Like,
well, that's
you're not talking about.
I'm
a nit to a certain extent, but I know where the edge is. So, like, I don't mind MMA. I'll play 150 lineups in MMA and play non-dupe. I mean, I'll do the same shit that I do in Showdown. But to me, that's where the edge is. I don't see on the main slate, on those slates, like, I'm much more likely to minimize.
You just said to me that you have a chance to, like, 1,000x your buy-in or like 500x your buy-in, and the worst case is you get 10% of your money back.
Okay, but you do that for a month straight, and good luck to you on 30 your bankroll being gone.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to go. That's just like the nature of DFS, I suppose. That like you're going to have losing months. You're going to have losing. Of course,
but what for your if you want to call it an X value. Like you said, you've been on a $1 million downswing, which is good.
I lost $1 million in 1 week of NFL.
You've lost $1 million in 1 week of NFL? Mm-hmm. But what's the percentage of that to your overall bankroll though? At that
I don't
that
want to.
moment.
I can't. I'm not going to comment on that.
Oh, you're not going to comment? But to
I
me,
can.
that's the most important number though.
Yeah.
Like for me, it feels like you're coaching me a little. So this is a preview. If you go to metafy.gg
Thank you.
/ chess is okay.
And I also want to bring up that it's also mental game comes into this, and people should talk to Elliot Rowe, who has helped me tremendously as a poker player and as a fantasy sports player as well with mental game coaching, and really helped me work through downswings and really helped me be objective. Because very often, like for me at least, like it's really important to zoom out and look at the long run when you're questioning yourself, and like you can have a graph that's going from the bottom left to the bottom right, and just if like I don't know, it's really easy, especially when DFS is so solitary and you spend all of your time working on improving and you get bad results. It's really easy to focus on what's been happening the last 6 weeks, the last 8 weeks, rather than zooming out and being like, oh my God, like I have reason to think, like any neutral third party would look at what's going on here objectively and say, oh, you're getting unlucky. So
Right. So
I think if you're a losing player, it's a little harder to have those skills because, like, I mean, we're talking about like mental game skills that are only appropriate if you are a winning player. I mean, a losing player is just going to not even be getting to this point, you know.
Right. But my X, if you want to call it an X value, of my biggest downswing, I've been playing for 6 years. My biggest downswing has been $30,000, and the $30,000 downswing wasn't more than 10% of my bankroll. So at the first time that I had a $30,000 downswing, my bankroll was $300,000, and that was the largest percent of my bankroll. So I hope you could tell from how I put that how much of a nit I am with my bankroll.
I think that you're making very large mistakes in terms of bankroll management and in terms of game selection. Because
mistakes I'm assuming you're going to say mistakes from a perspective that at this point in my DFS career, I should be up $5 million.
Well, I think people like underestimate how aggressive you need to be with bankroll management when you have an edge. Like Kelly criteria when you have an edge is going to tell you to bet way more than you can in DFS on most slates. So like, I mean, I remember when I was starting out and my goal was to like be betting 10% of my roll per slate or whatever it was. And yeah, at a certain point that just becomes you're not able to do it because your roll becomes so big. But I think that maybe what's going on when you talk about that, Jordan, is that you just have more of a bankroll than you need to play, because it sounds like you don't have an aspiration to move up in stakes or anything like that.
No, I have an aspiration to make 75,000. Right. That when it comes to that, like you say 10% of my, like for instance, on this weekend NFL, I'm going to play around $15,000 in volume, which to most people that are listening is a lot of money, right?
That is a lot of money.
Right. It is a lot of money.
That's betting a lot.
Right.
But with your roll, that's not.
That's 3%. I mean, like it's. So I could play off. I mean, from a mental state, I could play. I'm playing. You know, I've put in 15,000 and lost 12,000 in one Sunday. Okay.
And you're still not in the Millie Maker.
And I'm still not in the Millie Maker, right?
The thing is, if you play the Millie Maker, you can bet more of your roll too because you have a higher edge. So it's like, it's just. I think that in terms of bankroll management and do you max out, like when you talk about betting 2,000 on the single game, or are you?
I'm not playing 150. Typically, I don't play 150. No.
Yeah.
It depends. It comes down to, like you said, the mental thing, the question from before: are you good, or are you playing well or running good, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to Kelly, like I tell people that Kelly doesn't matter in DFS for two reasons. One, you mentioned one, because if you could compute the edge, you'd be risking way too much, or you couldn't get that much action at that edge. But the main thing is you have to quantify the edge. And on different slates, like I feel on certain slates, certain sports, certain types of contests that I have a bigger edge. Some I don't. Some I may not know. Some I may not even know. I've been playing MMA for the past year only because I studied it and I'm like, there's a big edge here, very similar to Showdown. But I started by playing 50 line. Like, I'm not sure. Let me see. Right? So you dip in, and then once you see, and you make some mistakes or whatever, but then the size of the slate change. Then we get slates sometimes when there's 9 fights on the slate, and it's like I run through lineups, and like last week, it was a 9-fight slate, and I'm like, I'm not sure how much edge there is here. Like, how many unique lineups can I make? And dude, I couldn't make a goddamn one. I mean,
Really?
I screwed up to the point in which I actually made money because it was one of those slates where the winning lineup is tied 7 million times. That type of slate. I don't like those. I like the slates where it's 15 fights and too many people are making duplicates, and there's so many ways for me to make uniques. So like on those slates, I max out. So it's like I still view it from a slate to slate basis of like where is my edge, but I'm more likely to not know. I'm more likely to say I'm not sure how good I am. So I'm going to play much more I'm going to play proper lineups, but I'm talking about from a bankroll perspective, play conservatively. Like so many people, the average player, James, typically does the opposite. They play too much of their role and they play lineups that are too conservative, right? I do the opposite of I have no problem playing high EV lineups that could be first or last, because I know that I'm only playing 2% of my bank. I mean, like I can play optimally, and I know that over the long run, I may only max out at $75,000 to $100,000 a year. I've had a $200,000 a year, right? And
awesome.
That's like if you've made $20 million, $50 million, whatever, a number that you won't disclose or whatever. Good luck. I mean, like, I'm happy for you. Like, that's perfectly fine to, like, but, like, I don't feel jealous of you. Like, if I gave that up, and it's like, dude, the way that you've been playing the past 6 years, you could have made $20 million. Like, I don't feel like, I don't have the FOMO of that. I'm like, dude, you should see in the last 6 years of my life. I get to wake up whenever I want. I like, there's a lifestyle thing of, like, I don't need a private jet. So, like, I know. You're going to tell me it's like I'm not playing optimally. But am I not playing optimally based on what I'm looking to do? I mean, like...
Well, there's one thing you said that's correct.
Great, one thing. I got one thing right. High five. I got one thing right.
A lot of people do what you describe, and it's kind of what Eric is doing to an extent, which is playing higher than they're rolled for and then playing the game inaccurately. You see this happen in like the main event in poker is like a great example for it. Like people buy in with a 10K or buy in with 10K and then they like very much don't want to bust round one, because it's like that's like a prime example of it. But I do think that I just think it's like what the perception of variance is and what it is in practice. If you run out the sims, is just going to be like a little different. That I think that making choices that's dropping your ROI like 10 to 20%, I just think is really unlikely to lower your variance.
But do you think I'm dropping that much ROI?
By playing the slant versus the milli maker, maybe even more, yeah.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
We could possibly disagree. I mean, that it really would just going by scale.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a correct yes or no. Maybe I'm not. Maybe my lineups for the slant is not. I'm not. Maybe my lineup set for the milli maker is not good enough. You don't know the lineups that I'm playing, right?
Right. If they're good enough for the slant,
yeah, I know. I'm trying to come out with I'm trying to like yeah. Obviously, if my lineups are good enough for slant, they're good enough for the milli maker.
Do you do well in the slant?
Yeah, I won. I won one last year. I mean,
nice.
But that's all. I look at my graph and. Like, most people comment on my graph and go, where are the downswings? And I go, well, look at that line and look at that little line and then I look at theirs and I look at their graphs and I go, I probably would have quit at some point. I mean, I I wouldn't
Well,
be able to handle
you need to
losing
look
a
at
million.
someone. You need to look at someone who's playing a consistent game, and you can't look at someone who is adding games that they may be a loser in. When you start talking about downswings, like if I'm consistently playing the low stakes and then I add 150 into the wildcat and I start going on swing, like that's what you're going to see in a lot of graphs.
Right. Well, I'm talking about
Because
graphs for people that aren't doing that.
yeah,
Right. But I mean, but I agree with you. I mean, you have to consider your graphs for individual sports. Like my soccer graph looks like just one diagonal upward. I mean, like, because that is my best sport. So like I have no problem, you know, dude, as long as it's not against Sarah. I mean, the soccer lobby is very, very small. So, like, my block list is essentially the 10 best stock. I mean, like, I just, like, dude, I'll post any head-to-head. Like, if some rando wants to come and play me in soccer, and they want to play me in $1,000 head-to-head, like, I don't, I don't mind.
oh,
Like,
you have
that,
to roll for that.
right. I have the role for,
And
right. If someone
it's
wants
a
to play me,
rando,
right. If someone came to me and say, I want to play you $5,000 a week in soccer, like, I have no problem with that whatsoever, but I can't get that. If I wanted to play $5,000 of volume in soccer, I have to be playing against the other sharpest. Like, I'm like, what, me versus Saramek? What is that going to? I mean, like, to me, it serves no purpose to even bother with that. So, like, I end up only playing 1,500 to 2,000 on a Saturday for soccer because, like, yeah, what am I supposed to do? Add $530 three-mans with the two other best players in the. I mean, like what? But some people, James, you know, people that do that. I mean, like that. I don't know.
I don't know so many people who do that.
What?
I don't know so many people who do that.
You don't know so many people that do that.
No.
I mean, you see so many. You have to think that in like the three mans and the head to heads, there are people playing $10,000 head to heads, knowing that like why are we playing against each other? Like why? I mean, you don't play cash games, so like it's a little bit different. But like, why would you want to play a three man against like the two other better? Like, even if you think you have small edge, I mean, you can't have that big of an edge compared to the rake. That why would you even want to take that action, right? I mean, we have Empire Maker. I mean, he'll take. I have to block him in soccer sometimes. I don't mind playing him in soccer, but dude, don't take all of my fucking act. I mean, great. So I'm playing $2,000 versus EM2 on this late, and he's not bad or anything, but it's like, dude, I'm waiting for fucking randos. Take one of them. Like, that's what I hate. That's more of the tilting thing, James. Where you post head-to-heads, and someone takes, like on FanDuel, now they have a limiter, where someone takes, like, you post up to, like, 215s or something, and then someone takes, like, 40 of your $5 ones. And it's like, fuck, just take the 215. Why are you making it so I have to fucking now post all that shit? But in the higher stakes, like, I'm not used to that, because I don't play in the higher stakes.
I'd tell you that if I was going to play every reg in the $500 three mans or something like that, I'd be doing it within the last 5 minutes of lock.
Okay, but in order to what? Why would you? What would it matter if you were playing against those? What, just in case they don't submit a lineup or something?
Well, I don't want them to know they're playing against me all day.
Oh. But are we talking about specific opponents? I don't want to get into the collusion stuff.
I don't want to give people the opportunity to change their strategy or to know that they're betting a lot on the slate.
Do you think they're even doing that, though?
What?
Do you think they're even altering your strategy? Because from my experience, much fewer people do than you think. I mean, I played some sharp regs in higher stake, at least 3-figure stakes, that, like, dude, their lineup's dead to mine and they don't swap. But the thing is that I've always compared that to me, because
I think that you just
pinpointed
pointed something where maybe I wouldn't call that player sharp. I mean, if what you described is true, then you're talking about someone who's probably a spot at those stakes.
Well, I typically chalk it up to volume, because, for instance, in NFL, I may play 300, 400 head-to-heads on, like, DraftKings, and am I going to go through all 50 of my $5 head-to-heads like a half an hour before the 4 p.m. game? No, I'll go through my 109s, I'll go through my 215. I mean, I'll go through those. So someone at the $5 level is probably going, Jordan
Well,
is
your
a
listeners
fucking
should listen to this and take you out.
right. Well, but I admit, at least I admit that I go like, if we're 1v1 or something and you're ahead and I happen to have the same lineup at a because some people have pointed that
Well, now
out.
you just answered your question why Empire Maker's sitting so much against you.
No, well, he doesn't change. Well, at the $5 level, at the 109 level, too, I am doing that. So to me, to Empire Maker, he's swapping out on his $50,000 head-to-heads, but his 109 against me, it's the same version of a $5 one against some random person that, like, I'm not getting to my 297th head-to-head to calculate whether or not I need to swap. And yes, I am giving up. I'm giving up what, $1.20 or something, and by doing that. But I need to put in the time in my $200, $215 head. It's the
That's true. That's
right.
fair.
I mean, but at least I understand that. So I could understand if someone's playing $300,000 worth of volume in head-to-heads, that maybe in the 109 against me, he's not swapping. But I don't play the $5,000 head-to-heads. But maybe you do. Maybe they are paying more attention there. So your attitude of I don't want to give them the opportunity to know who they're playing against may make much more sense in the very high stakes than in, if you're playing $1 head-to-heads. I don't is it worth caring about?
I think that, like, also if people knew they were getting sat for heaps, they might pay more attention to the slate as well. So they're varying. Like, you don't necessarily want your opponent to know that you're going to play them for heaps, especially because they just open set. So
What? So if you scoop, so you're more likely to scoop someone like the last minute before lock.
Mm-hmm.
Then you hope they don't. Then you what? You hope they don't notice.
I think it's going to be hard for. Yeah, I mean, I think it's often going to be hard for players to adjust to that.
But do you think they would be specifically playing against, like, how much of a dossier do you think high stakes players have on each other? Or you're not going to comment because you have a dossier and you're not going to. I'm not talking about what you know about specific players, but if you seem like, based on that smirk, that you're someone that keeps a dossier on players. And I'm telling you that I think a lot of high stakes players don't keep a dossier on other players. Specifically,
Well,
they may know generalities, but they're just like, I'm going to play my best lineup, and then that's it.
I think that you have to consider who the spots are at the high stakes. And I think what you're describing is just the weak players who are losing at those stakes. And that's really what it is. Even if these players are good at other stakes, like who of the people who are playing the $5,000 games, who do you think the losers are? They're like, there are randos who sit, but it's like not every reg's winning in those games. Like, a lot of regs are losing in those games. And when you think about, like, the high stakes GPPs, it's like, who are the losers? You see that there are these guys who enter 150 rosters and they're on average not losers. So, like, who are the losers in the game? And I suppose that's something to think about, like, because you're just talking about players in a kind of like binary way, like they're either sharp or they're not. And I think just the texture and the idiosyncrasies of, like, who's the winner and who's winning and who isn't is just, there are a lot of factors that play into it. And some of them is just like who's paying attention, and that happens in poker too. Like, you buy into a high stakes poker tournament and like half the table's on their phone, so like it doesn't really matter like how good they are.
Right.
But
it's still all relative skill. I mean, the biggest winners at the lowest stakes could be the biggest losers at the higher stakes.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, but that makes sense, because, like, if you could beat
And
the
I've
Porter
been that at
Arcade, it's like
varying-
great. But I mean, can you beat the luxury box? Can you? Or
I mean, I've been that at varying degrees at varying times in my career, and I can guarantee you Chipotle Addict has been too. So, I mean, that's just like how it goes, I think for a lot of high stakes players, you take on too much and you try to find more and more ways to put money to work, and it becomes like easy to add games you're losing at.
I mean, you talked about Sahil that way, and you mentioned on Lulz. I mean, I've never talked to him. He seems like a nice guy, whatever, like that. I don't know what happened. That doesn't matter. All I know is that I wish I had the bankroll I had now back when he was playing soccer. I've still won out of any person in I haven't played Sahil in a head-to-head, I think, in 5 years, 4.5 years, and he's still the person. He's still in my rotor tracker, the highest net net loser to me in soccer. And I also know like it was one of those things where, like you said, maybe you're good at NBA, maybe you're good at these other sports. Why the hell are you here playing $10,000 head-to-heads against the sharpest soccer players in the lobby? So do you think that, coaching-wise, that you're more likely to have students, instead of expand the sports that they play, expand the amount of slates that they play to kind of avoid, like, what happened with Sahil of, like, I'm going to take on all comers in all sports, and not necessarily realizing that you may not have an edge in them?
Yeah, I don't know if Sahil's the best example, because there must have been something else going on. It's very strange behavior to just start like punting it off in these alternative sports. I thinking more like when Chipotle Addict, and I don't know if he does this anymore, but like when he'll be open sitting all of the lobbies on the main slate and the 1 p.m. and the like every slate available, every game type, every just sitting everything. You've got to consider that he's going to be the spots in some of those games and structures that he's sitting.
Spot is that that's a term I've never heard of. A spot?
A spot, yeah. There's a gradient, I guess, of the spot is where the money's flowing from.
Oh, the spot. Okay. So where does X mark the spot?
Well, it depends on the game of structure. That's the point. But yes, I think that common advice I would give is for players to, like, what's your highest ROI game, basically, and to focus more time on playing that and expanding to play as many of those things as you possibly can. So if you're doing really well on low stakes GPPs, the question wouldn't be, how can I get into the high stakes? How can I start playing the $20? How can I start playing the SPY? How can I start playing the 3-entry high stakes? It would be, how can you do more of what you're doing at a bigger scale and make more decisions like what's working for you today? Because that's really how you're going to make a lot of money. I mean, you can, like I talked about for NBA, I mean, there tend to be like 3 or 4 slates a night where you can bet 1,000 per slate, and you can get a lot down. And if you're doing it at, like you were talking about, like 30% ROI, you're going to make a lot of money playing DFS. You know, you're going to be making over 100K a year or more. Like, that's just the way the math works out. And it's like, you're going to be playing the games where you're the best, where you have the highest edge, where you have the smallest downswings, where you have the highest expectations. So
that's much better than trying to do it. I can't do it. Well, we see a lot of people that I mean, this is where the burnout comes in, where they're playing NBA, MLB, Showdown, NHL, like all in the same night, and building their PGA lineups. And I'm like, people ask me like, oh, well, you're not playing PGA this week? It's like, dude, I don't have the time. I mean, I'm going to focus on the things that I'm good at and play more of that before expanding. Dude, I can't play 2 sites, and they're doing this on 3 sites. I'm like, they're either
that's
wizards,
the next step.
Right.
Is playing two sites up for the same slate, all the low stakes. I think that's like the way you scale. But I must run, Jordan. So I really thank you for having me on.
You're part of you own part of that company, right? Medify.gg.
I own a piece of the company. I'm an investor. It's a terrific marketplace for coaches for all different kinds of sports and games. All kinds of video games. No real life sports coaching at the moment. It has like poker, chess, DFS, as well as it is focused on video games. So it has like League of Legends, Fortnite, like all of the most popular video games as well, and has some of the best players in the world coaching on them. So
Metafy, METAFY.GG. You're there. Chess_is_okay. I'll put the link in the description if you want to get coaching from. I call you a former Millie Maker winner. You're a current Millie Maker. You've won it before.
Former Millie Maker winner.
Right. So
sometimes second place.
Sometimes steak knives. You get steak knives then.
Yeah.
Okay, so thanks for
Perfect.
coming on, and as always, the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports 15-hour
Yeah.
audio DFS masterclass at theoryofdfs.com.